I'm Brendan Shane with an NGO called C40 Cities. Really appreciate you all coming, and especially appreciate our panelists traveling from near or far on a Saturday, on Earth Day, on the March for Science Day, on one of the busiest days of the year so far. And to all of you for coming to the panel. Networks that drive solutions is what we called it. And so I'm Brendan Shane. I'm based here in Washington. I work for C40 Cities, and I work with the 15 members that are in the US and Canada. So we're generally a network of, I'll talk about it in a minute, network of mega cities around the world. And previously, I worked with the C40 network when I was at the district government, the District Department of the Environment and the Anacostia Waterfront Corporation. And before that, in various environmental law and water policy and geology. I'm a geologist. It feels like a long time ago, but I did actually get my master's in geology, so I have to rip out my my actual science gear later to march around. I will then introduce, this isn't the order we'll go in, but I've got it on my notes, so I'll go with that. Marty Spitzer from the World Wildlife Fund. He leads their efforts on businesses and cities to address climate change and to scale implementation of renewable energy. He spent over 25 years with nonprofits at different levels of government and different levels of government, collaborating with businesses, with nonprofit NGOs, and governments to drive sustainable business solutions. So this includes experience with the Center for Clean Air Policy, at the Science Committee of the U.S. House of Representatives, the President's Council on Sustainable Development at the White House, and also at EPA, I guess, before that. And when he's not doing this on Earth Day, or as soon as he's done this on Earth Day, he's out to coach Little League, which is great. Kara Ball, and I should say you're in DC as well with WWF's office here. Kara is in DC with ecoAmerica, where she leads Blessed Tomorrow, you'll hear about, and is their faith sector director. Previously, she's directed strategic relationships at the National Wildlife Federation and the Blue Ridge Center on Environmental Stewardship in Virginia, and at the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, which I was excited. I was just on spring break at Falling Water, which is managed by the Conservancy where Kara used to work. She has a double master's in public policy and business administration, and these I thought were cool. So she's a Virginia Master Naturalist certified. She's a climate reality presenter, trained climate reality presenter, and will join your husband. You have joined your husband, Reverend Jim Ball, for the What Would Jesus Drive tour, an educational campaign to reduce pollution and fuel consumption. And I guess is marching with some of those groups today. Then Josh Tewksbury is the director of the Colorado Global Hub for Future Earth. He's got a few roles. He's executive editor of Anthropocene, journal Anthropocene, Innovation in the Human Age. He's a research professor in the Sustainability Innovation Lab at the University of Colorado at Boulder, and then a senior scholar at the School of Global Environmental Sustainability at Colorado State. So he's got all of Colorado covered, or all the universities covered there. And so in those roles, Josh works to generate and communicate global sustainability science relevant to societies, connect research communities across disciplines and geographies, and help drive positive change in how international and interdisciplinary science engages with societal partners. And last, certainly, but certainly not least, Shonda Gilliland Foster is the program director for the David Smith Conservation Research Fellowship, which is a partnership between the Society for Conservation Biology and the Cedar Tree Foundation. And for more than a decade, Shonda has coordinated the Smith Fellows Program, which supports leading conservation scientists through 2 years of applied postdoctoral research, supplemented by training programs, peer networking, and field learning experiences. So what we're going to do is take about 10 minutes each, and I'll try to be ruthless I'll set the timer over here, starting with myself, for 10 minutes. And we'll just go through, I think, all of us, and then open up for discussion and Q&A. And the one thing to mention, both for our discussion, but then when we get to any questions, this is being live streamed, so if you have questions, we need to be sure we're mic'd wherever you're speaking. so that folks out in the rest of the world can hear us. So I will, well, another thing that I'll mention just in terms of introduction is that, well, I think we'll talk, each of us, about our own networks, but then a little bit how we work with other networks in our areas of focus across environment and climate, water and biology and science and research and all. And then in the discussion time, one of the things I want to talk about is a little bit about how increasingly networks are working together across disciplines and coming together, particularly in the face of some challenging times in the environment and climate space. So quickly about the network I work with. So the C40 Cities is actually now 91 cities focused on climate change specifically, but defining that broadly. So this is these are cities working across energy, transportation, water, and a whole range of issues and climate change. I'm not sure where my percentages went there, but we're now 91 cities. We'll top out at about 100. This is intended to be a small group of leading cities globally, but we currently represent about 11% of the world's population, and then more than double that, about 25% of the GDP, global GDP, is based in the member cities that we have currently. To get into the network, it's sort of an invitation-only network. It's very much intended to be peer-to-peer at several levels. This is bringing mayors together for political coordination and networking. The idea being that they'll go further together than they would individually. And then also at the technical and policy level. So working at several levels for about the last, I guess it's almost 12 years now. So we're just entering a new phase, a new business plan for the next 4 years, which is very much intended to follow up on the Paris Agreement that was signed at COP21. And the idea is that cities have unique authorities, unique powers, and the ability to act, that mayors and city councils and governments have the ability to move more quickly in many instances than nations or states or provinces. They also have a different mandate, right? They are reporting directly to the people, and so politics can tend to fade away a little bit more, and progress can be made sometimes more quickly. And that's what we need, is we need very quick progress. The mandates from Paris are very significant. We're focused on, as a network of leading cities, we're focused on cities delivering plans that are compliant with the 1.5 degree limit to global warming. And so in our new effort to move from the aspiration of Paris to action and implementation, the effort is that all of our member cities must have a plan that's compliant with a 1.5 degree scenario by 2020, or else they'd be moved out of the network, I guess. It's the first time we're sort of clamping down and setting a very specific target for these cities. And then in terms of the big picture of how we network, I take these these three sort of network theory examples or themes from a book by John Cleveland and Pete Plaster called Networking to Change the World. So first we're focused on literally connecting people. So it's bringing those people together so they know each other and know each other well enough to pick up the phone, get on the email, and connect to ask a question or to look for a best practice. Then we're aligning them. So that's our new effort to have cities be compliant with the Paris Agreement. So we're aligning around this ambitious goal of 1.5 degrees. And then you get to the real stuff, which is that they really need to take action, right? So then you're talking about actions they take individually, but really the collective impact. What can this network of cities, this network of officials, this network and its partner organizations, because we're partnered with people and groups all over the place, what can they do collectively to move the ball? So we call this current program Deadline 2020 for a couple of reasons. This is what I think it's the sort of first roadmap that takes a look at what would be required for cities to meet the Paris Agreement. So we essentially stepped back. It took about a year. You step back, you look at the carbon budget, what's allowable, what emissions are allowable by the world cities, and to keep us within the 1.5 degree warming, and then sort of allocate that out to each of our members, and then work to drive that into plans, and then to implementation of those plans in each of the member cities. This is tough stuff. So this is sort of like, even for the cities that are most aggressive, this requires a reassessment, an audit sort of where they stand. And for some of our member cities, particularly in developing countries, Global South, that have not had plans on the books previously, it's a lot of work. And so we do a lot of technical assistance, back and forth support, as well as really bringing them together to work toward this end. The optimistic part behind that challenge is that when you sort of plot it out, you see that cities can have a significant role in reducing, in meeting this 1.5 degree target. And so we estimate that cities can deliver roughly 40% of what's required to move to the end of the century. And the reason that is important, in part, is because many of you may know that what the nations brought to the Paris Agreement, even though they set an aspiration for 1.5, the commitments that were brought won't get us to 1.5. They won't get us to 2 degrees either. So there's a significant amount of ramping up of an engagement and action that's required to help keep us safer and cooler. So in general, our current chair is the Mayor of Paris, Mayor Hidalgo. And this is sort of our organizing theme for the network, really. Mayors all share the same same issues, right? And this may be across mega cities, the really big cities of the world, Tokyo or Mexico City, or what we call innovator cities like Copenhagen or Portland, Oregon, actually quite a bit smaller. The smallest I work with is New Orleans, which is we call an innovator city. But they have a lot of issues in common, and they have the ability to sort of work together for, as she says, a greener, healthier future. So since we're all focused on the optimism here, there's a lot of daunting concerns. There's a lot of daunting issues out there, but there is a lot of reason for optimism. And as I'm just going to give a couple of examples from the transportation sector in particular, where we see a lot of movement, and it's driven in part by a concern for climate, but it's also very much driven by a concern for air quality and public health, better, less congestion, and all the things that mayors and politicians care about at a local level. So you see right now happening, massive conversions of bus fleets, China being the best example. So cities there that will have their entire fleets converted to electric this year, and other cities adding in the next year. So one city there having probably multiples of all the electric buses in the United States, in just one city. The Clean Bus Declaration that we worked on brought together several dozen cities, negotiated with manufacturers to start driving down the price. And so you saw a 10% drop in price. And so then London orders 10% more buses. And then it's sort of a virtuous cycle as the price drops, that the orders go and cities scale up their level of activity. And then one that I really like, which was sort of originated out of the West Coast cities, in Los Angeles in particular, was the EV request for information, I guess, electric vehicles. So this came out of a few of the West Coast cities. They said, we need these types of electric vehicles. These are smaller, passenger and light duty and whatever. And within literally a month, they had aggregated 125,000 vehicle demand across 30 or 40 cities in the US, and were sitting down with manufacturers. They were getting 30 or 40 responses from manufacturers to come back to them. So really helping to move the market. One other example, which we just announced, called Aerovolution. So the mayors of London, Paris, and Seoul here were at this event just a few weeks ago in Paris. So this is the idea here is a kind of a unique one. Independent air quality monitoring by cities of transportation fleets. So normally you just look at what EPA certifies or the manufacturer certifies as their as the emissions. they don't always match up to reality. And so cities, even cities of Paris and London, have significant air quality problems. So working across a network of cities and with other partners, they're going to essentially start doing independent verification, and cities would then start setting limits. If your vehicle in reality doesn't drive with this level of emissions in the city, they would be restricted. Starting to look at new and unique ways to use mayoral and city power in either regulatorily or driving a market or other ways. And so then just the sort of closing big picture, the power of networks is very much in building on those individual strengths, because every one of these cities brings a different strength. And they can't all have all strengths. Even the biggest cities, even the New York City in North America that I work with. Ooh, I'm over time. All right, I'm done though. This is my last slide. Even New York City can't do all these things, right? So they really have to draw on the capacity of others. The relationships are critical at all levels, and you just can watch as some of the networks have done great quantification, right? You see those relationships build, and the level of action follows that. As we ask the cities, we see that they're 3 times more likely to act when a target is set. It's sort of a common sense. And that when we survey the actions cities are taking, more than a quarter of them are directly tied to knowledge sharing, through a network. So that is our network. I'm going to pass it over to Shonda next, I think. And we'll take some questions in a few minutes.
No, I don't want to see that. I really don't. Yes, that'd be fine. Great. Well, thank you, Brendan. As he said, my name is Shonda. I am the program director for the David H. Smith Conservation Research Fellowship Program. I am based here at the Society for Conservation Biology, just a few blocks away in Washington, D.C., and I've been doing this for the past 11 and a half years. You might gather from that I like my job, and indeed it is true. It is a lot of fun, and I am very proud and grateful to be at the heart of this network of scientists that I'm really excited to share their story and the story of David Smith, and why I think this network is an incredible source of Earth optimism. So the Smith Fellowship has supported 85 fellows since its inception in 1999. These fellows represent a vast diversity now of topical expertise, regional or geographical research coverage, methodology. We have veterinarians, social scientists, ecologists, ecotoxicologists, you name it. And so this breadth of expertise really is an amazing asset when we look at what sort of collective action they can do together. The Smith Fellowship provides 2 years of individual research funding, along with professional development in topics like leadership, facilitation, federal policy making, media communications. But perhaps most importantly, though, is this group collective community that's been cultivated by the fellowship program. And if there's one point that I really want to make today, it's that when we look at this from a program funding perspective, creating this community, this network of fellows, really doesn't require much in the way of funding. The vast majority of the program funding goes towards these 2-year individual research projects that are producing short-term outputs, which are fantastic. But where we're really seeing the long-term impact is in the individual career development and the group collective impact that they're having. Let me back it up for a second, though. It's the David H. Smith Conservation Research Fellowship. How many of you, other than my colleagues over there, have heard of David Smith? Not that many. So I'm going to do the hopefully 1 to 2 minute version of David Smith, how he came to conservation, and why his life story really inspires the spirit of the Smith Fellows program. And remember these words: risk taker, entrepreneur, optimist, that were spoken by his wife, who's now the chair of the Cedar Tree Foundation board that funds the Smith Fellows program. So David Smith was a pediatrician, and because he had to be an entrepreneur, not necessarily because he sought to be. David Smith is the reason why children no longer suffer and die from spinal meningitis. Uh-oh. It can't be 10 minutes yet. Okay. While David appreciated academic research for its own sake, he was really focused on public health solutions. And so after years of research and fundraising, he and his collaborators developed the vaccine, the Hib vaccine for spinal meningitis. And at this time in the early 80s, though, the pharmaceutical companies really were not interested in preventative measures. They looked at this as a treatable illness. There were already antibiotics on the market that they thought this vaccine would compete with, and so they weren't interested. And so David Smith did, at that time, what was unthinkable, and probably now would be unthinkable as well. He left a tenured chair position at a university teaching hospital, and he started his own company. He had 3 teenage daughters in college. He remortgaged his house several times over. He sold off family antiques, and he got this company, Praxis Biologics, off the ground. And in just the first 10 years of this vaccine being on the market, rates of spinal meningitis dropped from 20,000 in 1987 to just 81 in 1997. That was more than 99%, functionally eradicated it. You might be thinking, that is incredible. What does this have to do with conservation? I am getting there. So conservation was David Smith's second love. Once he sold the company, he and his family bought property out on Martha's Vineyard. You can maybe see up here at the top the Cedar Tree Neck Sanctuary, which is where the name of the family foundation came from. And while he was there, he got involved in conservation, and he really spotted that same gap between science, research, and application in conservation that he had seen in medicine. And so the foundation was established to address that gap. And it provides a lot of small grants, mostly in the area of sustainable agriculture and environmental health. But by far and away, the largest program, and the only one that bears his name, is the Smith Fellows Program. And sadly, David Smith, he passed away in 1999 from melanoma, just as the first cohort of Smith Fellows were being selected. But when we say that we're looking for risk takers, entrepreneurs, optimists, solutions-oriented research, it's really, that's where his legacy lives on. And so I stole this slide. Hopefully you can see in these checkmark bullet points here, the risk-taking, the entrepreneurialism, the solutions-oriented. And again, I'll point out, you can look at these and there's really no way to attach a dollar figure to any one of those items. Maybe the skills to work. We do the professional development and that costs a little bit. But the interesting thing about this slide is that I didn't make this. This isn't top down. The fellows made this. I stole this slide from the orientation presentation that's given from the fellows to the new classes of fellows to welcome them. And you'll see they call it a family, and they mean it. It's not just a network. It's a family. And so again, I would love to say that, myself and my executive director set out, 10 years ago to create something like this very intentionally. But I think it's more accurate to say that we probably stumbled upon this, and once we realized what we had, we were like, okay, we want to hang on to this. How do we do that? How do we cultivate it further? And I do have a couple ideas about that. The first is that you gotta pick great people, first and foremost. And so I stumbled upon this on Twitter one day, and I was like, yes, this encapsulates, this is what Smith Fellows are, in a nutshell. And I think sometimes we undervalue the knowing how to have fun as something that's a little bit frivolous, but you can have people that have really great ideas, and they're resourceful and they know how to make things happen, but are super difficult to work with. So we try to avoid that. And absolutely, we receive 100 proposals a year, and the initial part of the selection process is very much focused on the scientific merits of these research projects. But when we get to the tail end of that selection process, we really think about picking the person versus the research project, because again, it's the projects that's producing these short-term outputs. It's the people that we're investing in and the community that we're cultivating in that are having the longer-term impact. And the second thing is face time. These sorts of relationships can't be developed via email, via social media, via listservs, via Skype even. And so we do these 3 week-long retreats every year. So each fellow during their 2-year fellowship will get at least 6 of these that they'll attend. But we also invite the alumni to come back. So there's cross-cohort connections being made all of the time. And it's really tempting in these week-long retreats to want to overschedule. Let's have more presentations, more trainings, more panels. But the magic doesn't happen in a meeting room. It happens around a bonfire with a beer at night, or it happens when you pause to have a chat on a hike in the natural world that was, really the inspiration for why a lot of us came to conservation to begin with. So let's not undervalue unstructured time when we get folks together to really build those relationships. And then one of the last things that I want to touch on, that fellows work on, again, getting to this collective impact, is the idea of group projects. And again, this isn't something that's top-down dictated by the program. There's an expectation that each cohort or combination of cohorts will produce some sort of group project, but we don't tell them what to work on or how to do it. They come up with this organically themselves. So one such example of this is this policy brief that was done on a microbead ban, which came about, you probably saw this in the news in the past couple of years. And this was led by Chelsea Rockman. She was one of the 2014 fellows who's quickly becoming one of the leading voices on microplastic pollution here in the US. That's her testifying in front of the UN a couple of weeks ago. And she got a couple of classes together and they came up with this policy brief, and they utilized the Society for Conservation Biology as a platform to amplify their voices and put that out there. They did go ahead and publish a paper as well in Environmental Science and Technology. And this figure, 8 billion microbeads are released into US aquatic ecosystems daily, and it got smattered all over the news. And it got kind of picked up by various state legislatures. Chelsea was asked to testify before the California State Assembly. And ultimately, a number of states passed legislation, and it ended up on, the federal legislation ended up on President Obama's desk, and there was a federal ban. And certainly I'm not trying to take, the Smith Fellows credit for all of this, but it was really neat to have them be a part of this snowballing effect in, a good conservation policy issue. Taking group projects to a whole nother level, this is Brett Dixon. He was a 2008 Smith Fellow, and Smith Fellows are found in academia and NGOs and agencies, but Brett really kind of in the spirit of David Smith decided to chuck all of that and start his own organization. So that's Conservation Science Partners. It's networked, it's solutions oriented. He actually hired a number of Smith Fellows, both full-time and part-time, a number of different partners, and they're doing really, really cool things on public lands in the West. They've partnered with Center for American Progress. I'd encourage you to go to that website and check out the interactive maps in the disappearing West. And they were also responsible for the scientific underpinnings in recent national monument designations for like Bears Ears National Monument, Basin Range National Monument. So again, really cool stuff, collective impact, and we really think of Brett as, again, risk taker, entrepreneur, optimist, solutions oriented. I'll breeze through these because I think this is the fodder for discussion later on. This idea of scaling up and networking the networks. The Smith Fellows program interacts with a number of other similar programs with similar goals, increasing the skills and capacity of the world's up and coming scientists. One example I'll mention is the Liebherr Aero Fellows program. This was essentially a case where some Canadian funders came to us and said, we really like what you're doing. We'd love to replicate this in Canada. Can you help us? And we said, sure, absolutely. And so they came to one of our retreats. Once they got the program off the ground, we had a joint retreat in Central Coast of British Columbia, and they are off and going. And it's fantastic. And as opportunities arise, we continue to get these groups together and cross-connect amongst the networks in summer conferences, like the North America Congress for Conservation Biology last year in Madison, and this year's upcoming International Congress for Conservation Biology in Cartagena. And so wouldn't it be cool? That's the last thing I want to think about. Wouldn't it be cool if we had a Smith Fellows-esque program in more countries or in all continents? So again, thank you. I was really, really excited to be here and share the story of David Smith and the Smith Fellows program. It's a network that I'm really happy and proud to be a part of. Thanks. And I have these in the back of the room. Please go ahead and grab one. There's bios of the recent classes of fellows, more about the program. Yeah, thanks.
Great. So, like many, hopefully all of you, I love the earth and I love nature. And for me, that is one of the most compelling reasons why addressing climate change is something that is very important to me. And also, as a person of faith, climate change is something that is important to me because it's about how I treat the world that we all depend on. And so the majority of Americans actually also care about climate change. But what we know is that most of us don't care enough to do what we need to do to get the solutions that we need in the time and the scale that are required. And so what I'm going to talk with you about today is how by connecting on common values with the people who we all want to reach and to engage, we can do great things by inspiring others to action. And so I'm going to share a story about a faith partner who I work with at ecoAmerica. But what I'm going to share is actually applicable to anybody. So I hope you all will get some good information that you'll be able to use with the people who you work with. So the organization that I work with, ecoAmerica, is a national nonprofit that seeks to build engagement and support for climate solutions across America. And we do this by working across 5 sectors. I head up the faith program, but we also work with health partners, community partners, higher education, and business partners. And we do this by taking an approach of providing research-based communications and messaging tools, providing direct support to our partners, providing partner programs, and networking and convening opportunities for our partners to come together. And I wanted to share with you all that I took a few of our resources and I put them out on the table where the water is. And my goal would be to have them all gone because I'm heading over to the Science March and I don't want to carry them. So please help yourself. And I know there's not enough for everybody in the room here. So do go to ecoamerica.org and get more. And there's our communications guidance called 15 Steps. And there's also our most recent mental health impacts of climate change report, which we co-authored with a number of our health partners out there. And so the approach that we take focuses on connecting on common values with the people who we work with and highlighting the benefits of climate solutions in our daily lives. And what we find are that these 2 core things are vital to taking climate change, to change it from more of a public interest that maybe only applies to environmentalists and other people who, frankly, many people might not affiliate with, to making it what we call a personally relevant public interest. And the first thing that is important to connecting people to climate in this way is showing them that climate matters to them, making it salient. And it's sad, but now more and more people are understanding that climate matters to them because people are experiencing floods and droughts and fires and storms. And these aren't positive things, but they are raising awareness and attention of climate. The second thing that's very important is that people understand that there are proven solutions, and also solutions that will benefit their daily lives. And highlighting those benefits is going to be very important in your work in engaging others. The third is agency. Climate change is the one issue where all of us can do something about it every single day of our lives in everything that we do. So highlighting we all have the power to be part of the solution is extremely important to getting buy-in for solutions. And the moral imperative, connecting on common values with your audience. It's not about changing their values. It's about showing what matters most to them is how solving climate solutions can help benefit what people care most about. And so I want to tell you the story of a partner that I've been privileged to work with, the African Methodist Episcopal Church. It's a big denomination with over 2 million members and 7,000 congregations. They just celebrated their 200th year anniversary in 2016. And as part of their history, they've always been a social force for the things that are most important in their day. And the leadership recognized that they knew about climate, they knew it was impacting what they loved and cared about, their communities, their children, their brothers and sisters in Africa, whose food security was being impacted, the livelihoods of their families, of their members in Africa, by drought and by all kinds of things. And so the leadership knew that they wanted to address this issue with more intentionality and more depth and bring the full force of the church to this issue like they had brought to other issues. And so they approached ecoAmerica to partner with us to do that for the denomination. And one of the results was that last July, the denomination passed for the first time in their 200-year history a resolution wholly dedicated to climate change, which included the values of why they cared about it and what they were going to do about it, which included things like working to support the Paris Agreement and all kinds of things. And they also committed to using the full force of their social networks and their advocacy powers. They made it one of their top 3 issues in the 2016 election, for example, but they're continuing their great work. So what I want to do now is show a video that they showed, the leadership showed, to a gathering of 10,000 other leaders right before they passed, within the church, right before they passed, with unanimous consent, this resolution. So this will be them talking to their leaders.
think the important thing, which always governs me, is social action.
The AME Church has always been on the cutting edge for our people, and this is one we have to be on the cutting edge for.
Unclean air adversely affects us in many ways, particularly respiratory problems. You see that more in people.
Now hurricane season is longer, and the hurricanes are coming more strongly.
Since we're in the cities, we have a shortage of water, and most of our dams are in the southern part of the country where there's low rainfall.
We've had floods in places that have never had flooding problems. Many of our churches are finding that foundations are being undermined and wiped away.
Environmental racism is one of the things that impacts us, disproportionately impacts people of color and Black folks more than others.
Pollution really is the hardest on people who are in low economic areas. The AME Church has several unifying agendas. This is one of those human rights agendas that brings us together. Everybody deserves to have fresh and clean water, fresh and clean air.
I don't believe you can separate care for the environment from faith.
As people, we're involved in the everyday activities of the world, and so whatever happens in society, whatever happens in the environment, that affects us.
We have an awesome responsibility. Every facet of our church life has got to help people to become consciously aware of the environment.
First thing we need to do through preaching, teaching, and other means is to really inform and motivate our people.
There are many AMEs who are well positioned to do something about it and to have a voice in the decisions that government happens to be making that will affect climate change.
More than 51% of the African American community is in church on Sunday. We have a perfect opportunity to teach people how to green up their homes by demonstrating how we green up our sanctuaries and practice good habits.
I don't see why we couldn't have a Climate Change Sunday, where we would have a litany read in congregations, where we would talk about climate change, give information.
We teach it in church. The Sunday schools, they do it. When we have their quizzes, some of those questions are on environment, so that they are aware and can impact on the other children that don't go to church.
Lift those hands all over the building.
Blessed Tomorrow has already gathered partners who have history with this topic, who have rich stories to tell about what it means to come together.
Come on.
I'm not only excited about it, I'm also determined to do all that I can to see that this works.
So this is why I'm optimistic, because we have great leaders like the AME Church, like you all in the room, and each of us is passionate about something. And by connecting to those common values and focusing on the benefits of solutions, we can do great things together. Thank you.
All right, cool. Just keep going, right? Thanks all for staying around. I'm just going to give you a brief outline of some of the network stuff that Future Earth does and expand on some of the stuff I talked about in plenary. We're a network organization. We're a network organization that started with Global Change Sciences 30 years ago, and we're an organization dedicated to bringing science into a stronger position, to work with partners in civil society, to work with partners in government and the private sector, to create networks that allow evidence to get more rapidly into the hands of those people who can use that evidence to create change. We are the largest single collection of sustainability researchers in the world. Roughly, so this is kind of what Future Earth looks like right now. We have over 20 global research projects. Some of the individual projects have 5, 6, 7,000 people in them already. They exist all over the planet. We have 5 global hubs. We have regional centers, 7 regional centers. What Future Earth is an organization that is taking this diffuse collection of scientists who have stood up to say, hey, we work on global change issues and we want those issues to have a bigger impact in policy and planning around the world. We want that data and information to get into the hands of those that need it. So our job is to connect those people across discipline and to connect those disciplines with partners around the world. And we do that by taking projects that are somewhat disciplinary based and focusing them around knowledge action networks that are challenge focused. And so Future Earth is a network-based challenge-focused organization. How do you bring the best possible science from around the world together on these goals? And these goals are the same goals you will find in major civil society organizations around the world. What we bring to the table is the science, and we partner with others to build that science into actionable sort of products and services for communities. So a couple of examples how that works. So this is the Open Network, which is powered by Future Earth. This is essentially created as Facebook for sustainability. We put it up only a few months ago. It's got thousands of people from hundreds of countries already on it. We set it up so people can do work on it, so people can find others like themselves in other countries to create networks that can create change. Anyone can create their own community on it. Every one of our knowledge action networks has a community on it. Discussion boards are really active. We're adding dozens of members every day. And we also have calls for proposals and opportunities for funding that come onto there, whether you're a scientist or you're another kind of community. A whole bunch of opportunities are sitting on that, and we're trying to grow that as a resource, because not all networks can't. If you're global, you can't do everything in person. You have to have the virtual space as well. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff that we're doing as well. So the basis of Future Earth is bringing scientific communities together to work with partners around the world to create change. We not only do we build those knowledge action networks. We just launched one of our first funding opportunities. So if people are working on biodiversity and natural assets issues, this is a call for opportunities for scientists to work across disciplines to bring those together, to focus on major issues in biodiversity and natural assets. We're bringing science into all the major conventions. We're working with C40 on a conference really focusing climate science on cities. For example, in 2018, we were at Habitat 3 at the launch, and we're working with IPBES on a continual basis. So a lot of our work is trying to focus the attention of science on these areas. We also do a lot of work with journalism. I'm going to show you one thing. Sorry, I forgot my prop. There we go. So I'm going to end with just a really short film. And so part of our vision is that you don't make science have an impact just by doing science, because science alone isn't going to change what we need to have happen. Science and evidence are fundamental, as we're seeing out on the street right now. But they're not sufficient for the problems at hand. So the translation of that work into compelling stories and storytelling is central to what Future Earth does as well. So I'm going to share a short video of the first product we've launched to really do that well, which you all got in your bag, the first issue of Anthropocene magazine. So let me just give you that.
I think most people can actually understand it once you begin to actually unpack the word Anthropocene.
This great acceleration in human impact on the planet has pushed Earth out of this Holocene stability and into a new geological epoch.
Everybody has to define it and have not necessarily a common understanding, but different understandings that have a common goal.
The classic definition you would fold into geology, but this really is about not only science but human responsibility and sustainability for the planet.
Sustainability is not going to happen there and not happen here. And it is certainly not going to happen to the world if it doesn't happen in Africa, to India, and to China.
What an amazing juncture to be alive. Humanity was mostly a dribble for most of its existence, and then there's been Zoom, and now within the lives of most everyone who's alive right now, something different is coming.
I'm most interested in this transition between a state in which humans were a part of the world to a state in which humans had fundamental capacity to change the world. And I think that's the state we're in now.
Which then prompts the question, what do we do about that? How can we actually change the trajectories that we're on?
This is the first magazine devoted to the concept of the Anthropocene.
We've taken on this challenge because I don't think you can change the world without having conversations that just fundamentally aren't happening today.
We want to bring together some of the most creative scientists, entrepreneurs, business people, policymakers.
Artists and writers and musicians and poets.
To explore what do we need to do to create a human age that we want to live in.
If the world is going to understand science, it's not because they're going to read a scientific article. It is going to be because we tell compelling stories.
I read something terribly good last year in a magazine called The Anthropocene. I like to have those sort of stories, the stories that make people turn the world just through a few degrees so that they see things completely differently, not just while they're reading it, but from then on.
We need the story behind the science. We need the story in front of the science. We need the provocative questions. We need the engagement of society to create the change that's required.
The actors are there, but we don't have a stage. And I think that this particular magazine provides that.
Science discovery, hugely important. A voice and a story for the future of the planet, essential. And I'll just end by saying that's a network vision, because the only way that's happened is because a network of people from around the world have supported what we're doing. That the only way that's happened is because it's a network of scientists and writers and editors, and Kathy Combs, the editor-in-chief, is in the room here right there. You should stand up a second, Kathy, so people can talk to you. She's the creative genius behind this. And it's been incredibly empowering that people are willing to stay and stand up and say, yeah, I believe in these conversations and I want to support them, because that's the only way it happens. So thank everyone who's already supported us and push us to do more. Thank you.
Wow, that was great. I'm inspired by all the folks speaking before me. This is fantastic. I'm Marty Spitzer, and I'm with World Wildlife Fund. Let's see, get us here. And I lead our work with business and cities to try to advance climate change. I've been working on climate change for over 20 years now. And I haven't always been optimistic. I've had my moments of optimism. A few years ago, I was feeling less optimistic. After our climate legislation in the US failed, it was becoming more tricky to figure out what was really going to happen. I am actually more optimistic now, despite our political environment, than I've been in a while. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about why. And it has to do with what's going on in the business world. There are tailwinds supporting what we need to do. And I want to leave you with the most important message is that it's happening. Our world is changing. Our energy world is changing so rapidly, and we're in the middle of it. It's hard to notice sometimes, but we are headed. The clean energy revolution is not in our future. It is here now, and it's happening right at this moment. And people are speaking up about it. So I'm going to try to squeeze in a discussion about two networks here. One is called our America backs a low-carbon USA. It's a network of businesses and increasingly higher education that we're announcing today, actually, that has joined together. And the other is our Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance, which is a coalition of businesses, basically large corporate America, along with renewable energy providers and others who have been getting together to make it easier to buy renewable energy. And we'll talk a little bit more. So on Tuesday, we're going to release an updated report that WWF has put out with a number of other organizations that shows that 60% of the Fortune 500 have set climate or energy goals. And that the Fortune 100, and almost 50% of the Fortune 500 have set those goals. Companies that set goals, just like somebody else said, actually make more money when they do. And we've started to see a virtuous cycle where the companies that are setting goals, most of them meet those goals. 1 in 5 exceed those goals, and they do so easily sometimes that they're getting excited and they're setting more and more ambitious goals. So now we see science-based goals coming out of companies. 2 years ago, no company had set a goal that was equivalent to science. Today, we have 260 companies that have committed publicly to setting a goal, 40 of which have so far set them. That's over 2 years. So I want to talk first about our Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance. That grew out of work with the companies that we're partnered with in one way or another, where it turned out they were setting some of these goals and it was really hard to buy the renewable energy they wanted. So back in 2013, we got a dozen of them together to sit around a table to brainstorm their biggest challenges and what they could do together to solve them. That led to this network being born, and it's got a couple of components. It turned out that most of us are from the US. Well, you know that in most states in the US, you can't buy your energy from this provider you want to. In some states, you can. And in those states, the transaction of buying output from a wind farm or a solar farm in sort of big quantities was really complicated. And so in the top corner here, we created something called the Business Renewable Center that Rocky Mountain Institute developed. It's going like gangbusters, making it easier for large corporate buyers to buy huge amounts of renewable energy, and we'll show you a little bit about what that looks like. They also decided to develop a statement of principles. 12 companies got together in 2014 and put the first statement out. It's now up to 65 companies. You obviously recognize most of those brands, and continues to grow. They represent the demand out to 2020 for 48 million megawatt hours of demand. That's enough to power about 4.5 million US homes. And that's their aspiration. And that aspiration has allowed us to take their voice into lots of quarters of the US, to utilities and others, and say, these large buyers want renewable energy. Let's dispel the myth that people don't want renewable energy. If these brands want it, and we know that many of us want it, who's left? There's really nobody left. It's just going to happen. And so we're seeing huge progress. On the chart on the left is, and I don't want you to get distracted by the GIF going on the right, but on the left is the chart of, you'll see there was the first years, 2010, 11, and 12, there was almost no purchases of renewable energy. Google made the first one back in 2012, really. 2013, 14, 15, the purchasing was doubling by corporates. It dropped at the end in 2016 because of the threat of the tax credits expiring at the end of 2015. So if you sort of average 2015 and 2016, it would still be headed up. And 2017 is off to a decent start in the first two and a half months. One of the trickier stories and more exciting ones is really on the right, where what you're seeing is utilities now that are beginning to offer products to their customers, their corporate customers, and some, smaller commercial customers for renewable energy. It's been driven by the network of businesses that got together. So the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance is essentially a community of over 90 companies, service providers, and now utilities. Imagine this, we're actually talking to utilities who initially walked away, had no interest in renewable energy. How can they walk away when their customers are going out to Texas and other places and buying wind farms? So they were bypassing. I like to joke on the U2 song, it's with or without you. The companies are going to the utilities and telling them we're going to do this with or without you. We'd love to do it with you. And we're starting to see the change. So we're going to see more of this, and it's very exciting. Lots of interesting things going on. So REBA is here in the US, but we're beginning to look at it globally. Our partners are World Resources Institute, Rocky Mountain Institute, and a group called Business for Social Responsibility. And we're looking for other partners as well. We're starting to expand into some other countries. And each of the networks will look different in those places because the conditions are different, but we're very excited about this growth and going global. So I'm going to shift gears back to the US for a minute. At the end of, right before, 6 months before the Paris negotiations were underway, we, WWF, got together with 10 other NGOs and said, what could we do with the business voices that we all work with to magnify it so that it could have more of an impact going into Paris? And we put together a statement that came out just before the full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal, right when the Paris negotiations were happening in December of 2015. And we've since kept that group together. We had 80 or 90 companies on that full-page ad. We now have the same statement, which basically says we want a strong agreement in Paris. We need to keep temperature increases to well below 2 degrees. We need to invest in the future economy of the United States and the clean economy. And it turned out that we now have over 1,000 companies that have signed on to it. That statement was sent as a letter to President-elect Trump back in the fall. We've been right after the election, and we continue to roll that out. These 1,000 companies are now in 46 states. Give you an idea that I think the geography matters now. It's not just the size of the companies anymore. It's sort of like the breadth of where they come from that are going to make a difference. And today we're excited. So this is the business backs of Low Carbon USA. And today we're actually excited to announce that we've added higher ed is now joined this. And so like the lowcarbonusa.org website will have you'll basically get to see a statement from universities that they've put out, very, very, very similar to the business statement. So we're seeing some growth. We expect this platform to grow more. Could we have faith-backed a Low Carbon USA? Brendan, we've been talking with a lot of cities groups about what are the opportunities for cities to come together. Whatever the platform, whether it's this or another, our strength on climate is going to depend on our ability to work together across sectors. So I'm optimistic about what we've seen. I am excited about the progress we have tailwinds. The economics are in our favor on clean energy. And the networks, empowered really by a conference like this, make me inspired. And I'm looking forward to taking some questions.
Thanks, Marty. Why don't we, let's sit up here. And just a reminder that I'll just open up here with a comment or two or question or two, but then start thinking of questions, comments you've got, or other network experiences that you might want to share, kind of maybe briefly, right? Let's try to keep each comment relatively brief or question so that we can get through some folks. I was just going to thank everyone for doing that, and we brought this panel together with some folks that I knew already, but others that Smithsonian and others connected us to. And so it's really interesting to see, groups working at the professional, 75 or 100 professionals, a growing network, which is sort of expanding its horizons and really seeing the benefit of that networking capacity to then thousands of congregations, thousands of businesses, thousands of professionals, and then in my case, 100 cities, but I should mention that we're working, very closely with a whole range of other networks that grow that number to really thousands of communities across and cities across the country and around the world. So I was going to pick up on where Marty left off with one starting question, which was just about that concept of networks working together. So we heard examples here of how within disciplines, within science, within city governments and things, folks are increasingly working together. But to Marty's point, and I think this is particularly true in the U.S. political context, a question of how are all these networks, or how can all these networks collectively apply pressure, whether it's political pressure, market driving, financial pressure, to make the change that we want to see. And so was just going to ask that question about networking the networks. I'll just mention that, I think at the city level, and in the work we do, and the work that most of the folks on the panel do, we really are covering a whole range of disciplines, even if it's within the climate or science context. So you're inevitably going to be networked with transportation groups and energy groups and the professional networks that are supporting them. But in our case, it's very much a matter of you're not going to get across the finish line. You're not going to achieve the goals from a city perspective just by doing what the city can do. So you have to be reaching out to engage business and private communities. You have to be engaging civil society, whether it's faith-based or education-based. So I think for our organization and from the city perspective of mayors, you just can't get to the goal without doing that cross-sector engagement. My comment would be that despite the fact that you can't get there, I don't think we do it that well yet. I mean, I think we have a long way to go to do that more effectively and to get out of our silos of government person here, private sector person there, higher education person there, and working well together. I'll just maybe take a quick comment for anybody who wants. Oh, yeah. And we're going to end by 12:30.
That's 7 minutes. My quick answer is the network's.
We'll go over a little.
The network is critical. In my experience, having worked now with lots of organizations, is that we have too many initiatives, and we need fewer initiatives with more people behind them. It's as simple as that, and it turns out that's really hard. Everybody wants credit. I mean, I can give you some examples. We're actually thinking about Low Carbon USA in the same way, taking a lesson from a group called We Mean Business, which itself is a network, which has essentially an umbrella under which different initiatives can live, but they're all oriented around business globally. And it's almost like the Visa model. The initiatives are independent, they have their own branding, but finding some ways to allow everybody to share in this glory is one of the challenges, but I can't agree more. And just a point, geography as cities are, geographies are inherently cross-cutting. You can't talk in a city about sustainability without talking about everything. So I work on energy, but when he works on cities, there's a lot of issues coming up across cities. So I think we need to have some natural aggregation. Places and cities are a natural aggregator for us to rally around as a potential.
Comment if you'd like quickly, or pass it around. Or we can just go to our first comment.
Yeah, I'm happy to go to the comments.
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Anna Porzakansky from the Museum of Natural History. Thank you for those awesome presentations. It left me thinking, I think by networking, you're also changing the way the members of the network operate, clearly. And I'm wondering, it feels to me, somebody said in the first day, we need to evolve our institutions. And I think they were really talking about more like national governments or even global institutions. So I'm wondering, is there a network that's doing that? Or how are you working to do that? We need all of it, obviously, but it feels like we have a real disconnect with those other levels.
I can just speak from our network, which is the entire, I often start talks by saying that, in academic audiences that, if you took someone from 1850, 1860 and dropped them into this world, there's only one institution they'd recognize, and it's higher education, because it hasn't changed since about the start of the Industrial Revolution. We now have an exponential growth in all aspects of society, perhaps excluding most of higher education. It absolutely needs reform throughout the whole system so that we can, and that's just one sector, and it's the sector we work on, and it's central to our goal is figuring out how to get higher education and the minds in higher education more engaged, more easily engaged, while maintaining their ability to do good science. So fundamentally, it has to be what we're working towards. I agree.
I'm just curious on the panel or in the room if anyone has, that question of how you change a network and how you move it. So ours is a relatively new network and relatively small, so probably a little bit more nimble. But I can't answer the question about who you go to for advice on how to keep your network most effective and how to have it. You should sort of be iterating and changing over time to respond to respond. So maybe I'll take that as homework. Yeah. Next.
Okay, hi. I'm Caroline Nimchek. I'm on the National Board of the Trust for Public Land, and in that capacity, I'm also the chair of our C4. So it's a network I'm offering to you to help raise capital. This conference is not just about optimism, but it's very much about conservation. And in the conservation sphere, this political network has gotten over 100 million voters in America, 100 million voters, to say yes to conservation. And in the last 14 years or so, we've raised $68 billion that way to spend on conservation. And it gets spent because the terms of these are usually constitutional state amendments. The money is there and has to be spent.
I will just mention one thing because we partner with TPL, and there are a whole bunch of groups, obviously not represented here, that are incredibly effective. And I will give them a plug in addition to yours because the Smart Cities program and the Climate Smart Cities program coming out of Trust for Public Land is a great model to look at.
And I'll just echo Brendan's kudos. I'm familiar with the work of Trust for Public Land. Your work is a model of success. You've done phenomenal work raising these funds. And I would venture that one of the reasons that you're a model for success is that you are very explicit about highlighting the community benefits of these bond issues and these financing mechanisms for all those who care about them.
Yeah, but we also poll.
Yes.
And we use that language that comes out of the poll. So you have a 4% range of, going down. We actually win 85% of the referenda. So it's a 2,000 to 1 leverage for donation. I mean, just think about the efficiency of that. There's like no wasted time and no wasted money. So I'm just saying we could work together.
That's good.
Great.
Appreciate that for sure.
Hi, I'm Bill Anderson. I'm with the Transportation Research Board of National Academy of Sciences, and we're currently working with the European Commission on how we can increase research to mitigate the greenhouse gas emissions from vehicles or other aspects of transportation. What we're trying to find out is, are there any real networks collectively working together from a mega region perspective that focus in that particular area? Because this is a real challenge, and we've seen a lot of partners working locally within compacts, for example, within Miami. Colorado's creating one right now with multiple counties looking at climate change compact development there. But from a mega region perspective, we're having a problem trying to find that kind of a network. Are you aware of anything like that?
I would just mention quickly, I mean, we're increasingly moving into air quality explicitly as one of the prongs of the climate work. The program we just announced, it's not a network as much as the center. You probably know ICCT out on the West Coast here is who we're partnered with. And so I'd be happy, I forgot to say I have cards up here, so I'd be happy to follow up, and it'd be a matter for me of connecting you through to them to see if they might be able to provide some more feedback.
And just one, when I was on the Hill, I oversaw the DOT's R&D program, so I spent a lot of time with TRB, so I'm very familiar with it. And there's actually work going on right now as part of the science-based targets movement, developing methodologies for science-based targets for all kinds of vehicles, basically from passenger all the way to freight. So that's more the technical side as opposed to the network side, but that's also something you could connect the dots on if you're interested.
We've connected with those folks doing the research. It's just getting to the network so you can have a change occur regionally, a better understanding of how things move and why. So you can actually get those partners together who are discussing it to look at the overall impact that they're causing collectively.
I'll just mention two others. So there's two organizations, Compact of States and Regions and the Under 2 MOU, which is supported out of Governor Brown's office.
Which is our basis.
Yeah, okay. So they are increasingly networking regional scale folks. Might be good to touch base with as well.
And I was just going to mention the organization that I actually work for, the Society for Conservation Biology. It's a membership organization, but it's 4,000, 5,000 people worldwide, and there's topical working groups as part of the society, which would be a way to actually create one of those networks that's focused on the work that you do.
While you were speaking, I'm realizing also there's a group of our WWF colleagues that are actually looking at some of these issues. I'll connect the dots with you if you give me your card after
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Maybe we'll take one more because they asked us to wrap up. We'll go over a little bit.
Thank you. I'm Ruben. I'm a PhD student from Duke University. And this question, I think, goes more for Brendan. And are you guys in the C40 or other city networks talking about a future in which cities can have more political and economical independence from the countries you're in now?
Well, that conversation is certainly being had. Some of it is a response to reality, right? In many parts of the world, the megacity capital or other, or couple of them, are basically the entire economy of the country and most of the people within the country. So in some countries, there's the ties between city management leadership is much more explicit. In places like the United States and other countries, we have a very big push, not so much to take power away from others, but to be increasing the amount of the power and self-control that cities do have over things like their energy supply. Some of our cities own their utilities, and own their transportation networks and can really move things more quickly. Others are seriously handicapped by the lack of control and the need to work through multiple layers of government. So there are, depending upon where you are geographically, very active discussions about what level of power, when given to the city or to the region, can really help advance the kind of action you need, for a climate purpose, but also for a public health, a congestion and air quality, and energy supply purpose as well. Anybody else? All right, thanks. I think we'll wrap up there. I was going to, one last plug. If you're not networked, you should get networked, right? I think you heard that here. So this is so much about relationships within the professionals and then within the people we work with and serve. So if you're not active with a network in your field, go find one or come join ours. Thanks for coming today.